It was the 10th of July, 1973. Summer had settled upon Prague, the ancient capital of Czechoslovakia, with a pleasant warmth beneath clouded skies. The cobblestones of Strosmayer Square retained the morning's dampness, and the air carried the familiar scents of motor oil and cigarette smoke that marked the district of Prague 7. Tram bells rang out across the thoroughfare as workers and pensioners went about their daily routines, moving between the grey apartment blocks that characterised the Eastern Bloc architecture of the era. At the rental office on Defenders of Peace Street, a young woman of 22 years had completed her test drive without incident. The assistant had examined the vehicle, a Praga RN medium lorry manufactured in Czechoslovakia, and accepted her payment of 260 crowns. She drove from the lot just after 10 o'clock in the morning, the lorry's engine rumbling as she navigated the familiar streets. None could have known what thoughts occupied her mind as she drove through Prague 7 that day. None could have imagined the calculated violence she had planned for 6 months prior. By afternoon, Strosmayer Square would become the site of the most devastating act of mass violence the city had witnessed in peacetime. The question that would haunt the courts and the public alike was this: what had happened to the young woman at the wheel? Olga Hepnarová was born on the 30th of June 1951 in Prague. Czechoslovakia itself was a relatively young nation, having declared independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in October of 1918. By the time of Olga's birth, the country had become a member of the Warsaw Pact, aligned with the Eastern Bloc in the post-war order that divided Europe. She entered the world as the younger daughter of a middle-class family. Her father worked as a bank clerk, maintaining the ledgers and accounts that formed the backbone of commerce. Her mother practiced as a dentist, a respectable profession for a woman of her generation. In her early years, Olga appeared an average child, performing adequately in her studies. Yet as she grew older, something within her began to shift. She found herself unable to speak with ease to her parents or to her classmates. She later told physicians that she could hardly approach people, that the world itself had become her enemy. The isolation grew within her like a shadow, lengthening with each passing season. In 1964, when Olga was but 13 years of age, she consumed an overdose of 10 tablets of meprobamate, a mild tranquilizer. Her sister discovered her unconscious and bleeding. The family rushed her to hospital, where she was placed within a psychiatric ward. For 1 full year, she remained under medical supervision, whilst doctors observed her condition and carried out various examinations to establish the state of her mind. The physicians noted that Olga had developed a dependence upon tobacco. She displayed profound apathy. One doctor recorded in his notes that she suffered from schizophrenia. During her confinement, Olga spoke to the doctors of her difficulties. She told them she could not communicate with her parents. She claimed her father had beaten her. She stated that all the adult members of her family showed her unkindness, and that even with her older sister, she found it impossible to form any meaningful connection. She told the doctors that her family had crippled her soul. As the months passed and Olga grew older, her troubles of mind did not diminish. She began to withdraw from school, remaining at home instead. In Czechoslovakia, during the 1960s, there existed limited provision for young people suffering such psychological afflictions. When Olga reached the age at which she was expected to leave her studies and find employment, she attempted to fulfill her duty as a citizen. Work was found for her, yet she could not maintain her position for any considerable length of time. The various establishments that employed her would typically dismiss her within mere days of her arrival. She trained as a bookbinder in Prague, learning to stitch and press the volumes that filled the libraries and shops. Later, she found work in Cheb, a town near the western border, where she labored for approximately 1 year before returning to the capital. Eventually, she secured employment as a lorry driver, a position that suited her solitary nature. She purchased a small cabin in the village of Oleszko, from which she would travel to her work. The cabin represented a retreat, a place removed from the family with whom she could find no peace. Later, she sold this property, and with the money acquired a Trabant motorcar, that ubiquitous vehicle of the Eastern Bloc. Yet Olga's isolation only deepened with time. She was desperately lonely, profoundly depressed. She required understanding, yet found none. Her feelings toward her family, toward society itself, began to curdle into something darker. Hatred grew within her, feeding upon her isolation like flames upon dry timber. On the morning of the 7th of August, 1970, Olga committed an act that would remain hidden for 3 years. Her father had inherited a farm in the village of Zabrody, which the family used for leisure. Before dawn, Olga approached the property on foot, having taken a taxi from Náchod and walked the remaining distance through the darkness. She carried with her a bottle of petrol. At the door of the dwelling, she poured out the liquid and struck a match. She hoped the flames would reach the hayloft and consume the entire homestead. Inside, her sister slept, along with 2 tenants, a married couple, both above the age of 75 years. They woke to the smell of smoke and extinguished the fire before it could spread. The damage amounted to merely 50 crowns. No one suspected Olga. She would confess to this arson 3 years hence, during a psychiatric examination. She stated that disputes over the property had caused discord between her parents. She had wished to resolve the matter through destruction. By 1973, Olga's hatred had crystallized into purpose. She began planning her revenge upon society some 6 months in advance. She believed that all people sought to harm her. She claimed she had been assaulted in the street without provocation, and that none had come to her aid. She refused to become an unknown suicide, forgotten by history. She wished to be remembered. Her initial plans were ambitious. She considered derailing an express train or detonating explosives in a crowded room. These schemes proved too technically demanding. She then planned to obtain an automatic firearm and open fire upon the crowds in Wenceslas Square, that famous thoroughfare in the heart of Prague. She enrolled in the shooting society at Svazam to gain the necessary skills. Yet this plan too was abandoned. She feared she might be shot immediately, and acquiring such a weapon presented considerable difficulties. At length, she settled upon a simpler method. She would use a vehicle as her instrument of death. From the 11th of January to the 10th of July 1973, Olga resided in room 502 of what is now Pension Malachitze, which then served as a hostel for workers of the Prague Communications Enterprise. On the 9th of July, she journeyed to her cottage for a final visit. She then abandoned her beloved Trabant motorcar, to which she had been greatly attached. The following day, the 10th of July, she presented herself at the rental office. She successfully completed a test drive to demonstrate her capability to control the specific type of lorry she required, a Prague RN medium truck. The assistant found no fault in her driving. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Olga drove the lorry from Defenders of Peace Street towards Strosmayer Square in the Prague 7 district. She had studied the location carefully. The square featured a tram stop at the bottom of a sloping street. The gradient would allow her to gain speed. She drove down once, but continued past the waiting crowd. They were too few. She wished to cause maximum carnage. She circled back to the top of the slope and waited. More people gathered at the stop. 25 souls stood upon the pavement, waiting for the tram that would carry them to their destinations. Olga pressed the accelerator and descended the slope, gathering speed as she went. The lorry mounted the pavement at considerable velocity and struck the crowd with devastating force. Bodies were thrown through the air. The sound of impact echoed across the square, metal against flesh and bone. 3 victims perished immediately at the scene. 3 more succumbed to their injuries before the day concluded. 2 others would die within the following days. 12 more survived, though many bore injuries of considerable severity. The victims ranged in age from 60 to 79 years, pensioners and workers who had gathered for an ordinary journey home. The lorry came to a halt of its own accord. The engines stalled. Witnesses rushed forward, believing the driver had lost control of the vehicle due to mechanical failure. Yet Olga made no attempt to flee. She remained seated at the wheel. When approached, she stated plainly that she had driven into the crowd with full intention. She had meant to kill. The police were summoned immediately. Constables arrived within minutes and placed Olga under arrest. During initial questioning, they asked if she had fallen asleep at the wheel, if the brakes had failed. She informed them that neither was the case. She had acted with complete deliberation. In her statement to detectives, she confirmed her intention had been to kill as many people as possible. She expressed no remorse whatsoever for her actions. She stated, "There were no trams, no cars. Nothing was in my way. I said to myself that this was the right time to do it. I drove on the pavement, went on, and ran into a crowd of people, knocking them down." 2 days after the attack, 2 newspapers, Svobodne Slovo and Mladý Svět, received letters posted by Olga on the 7th of June. The letter explained her actions as revenge for the hatred she believed had been directed against her by her family and by society. She had written, "I am a loner, a destroyed woman, a woman destroyed by people. I have a choice, to kill myself or to kill others. My verdict is, I, Olga Hepnarová, the victim of your bestiality, sentence you to death." If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let us continue. Olga was remanded to Pankráč prison whilst the investigation proceeded. During the 1960s, Czechoslovakia had become the first Eastern Bloc nation to accept the United Nations standard minimum rules for prisons, which meant the introduction of psychological specialists. Prison psychologists conducted extensive examinations to assess Olga's mental state. After thorough evaluation, they concluded that at the time of her crime, she had been fully aware of her actions. They declared she was not suffering from mental illness. This diagnosis contradicted the earlier finding of schizophrenia made when she was 13 years of age. Olga Hepnarová came to trial in 1974 at the municipal court in Prague. She was represented by an experienced solicitor who mounted a vigorous defence. He insisted that she suffered from schizophrenia and presented considerable evidence to support this claim. His documentation reached back to her first diagnosis at the age of 13. He had records of her delusions regarding other people's attitudes toward her, her feelings of injustice and hatred, and the growing compulsion toward revenge that had consumed her mind. In 1967, when she was less than 16 years of age, she had written, "I hate people," followed by detailed explanations of why she held such views. Yet Olga refused to cooperate with her own counsel. She informed the court that she was entirely sane. She stated that she held no regrets for what she had done. She attempted to deliver a speech in which she blamed her actions upon society itself. Her words were recorded. If society destroys individuals, individuals can destroy society. I wanted to take my revenge on society, including my family, because they are my enemy. Knowing that I managed to do it, I felt a kind of release and satisfaction. She revealed that she had considered committing her attack in the famous Wenceslas Square, but had dismissed this location as unsuitable. She feared the lorry would attract too much attention before she could complete her purpose. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically: the planning, the rental of the vehicle, the reconnaissance of the location, the deliberate second approach when she judged the first crowd too small, the testimony of witnesses, the immediate confession, the letter sent to the newspapers. The jury withdrew to deliberate. On the 6th of April, 1974, they returned their verdict. Olga Hepnarová was found guilty on all 8 counts of murder. The judge pronounced sentence: death by hanging. Her mother initiated an appeal to the Czechoslovak Supreme Court. The appeal was rejected. The sentence was confirmed on the 3rd of March, 1975. The Supreme Court re-qualified the conviction to public endangerment whilst maintaining the same penalty. The gravity of her crime was such that even the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia, Lubomir Strogl, declined to grant clemency. Her mother's plea for mercy was refused. The execution date was fixed for the 12th of March. When interviewed in prison whilst awaiting her fate, Olga told reporters, "I am not afraid of the death sentence. I do accept it." She demanded to be executed, declaring she deserved no mercy for her actions. Yet when the appointed day arrived, accounts differ as to how she faced her final moments. On the morning of the 12th of March, 1975, a prison guard unlocked the door of her cell and entered. He secured her hands behind her back and informed her that the time had come to walk down the corridor so that the final sentence might be carried out. Some reports state that she remained calm, accepting her fate with the same cold detachment she had displayed throughout her trial. Other accounts tell a different tale. They describe how Olga slumped to the ground, how she began to scream and weep. The young woman who had told the court and the press that she was ready to face the consequences of her crime was, in truth, terrified. She became hysterical and had to be physically carried to the gallows, pleading for her life until the last. At Prague prison in Prague, Olga Hepnarová was executed by short drop hanging. She was 23 years, 8 months, and 10 days old when she died. She became the last woman to be executed in Czechoslovakia and one of the final persons in that nation to be hanged using the short drop method. The victims of Strassmayer Square were laid to rest in the cemeteries of Prague. 8 families mourned their dead: mothers, fathers, grandparents, taken without warning on an ordinary summer afternoon. 12 more bore the scars, both visible and invisible, of that terrible day. In the years that followed, Olga's case became a subject of fascination and horror. In 1991, the Czech writer Bohumil Hrabal published a novel in which he described the remorse felt by an executioner from Prague for sending a beautiful lady named Olga to the gallows. In 2001, Roman Chilek published a work titled Oprátka za 8 mrtvých, The Noose for 8 Dead, which recounted her story alongside contemporary documents. In 2016, a film based upon her life was released, titled I, Olga Hepnarová. It was shown at the 66th Berlin International Film Festival, where audiences watched the recreation of events that had shocked Czechoslovakia more than 4 decades prior. Strassmayer Square remains today, still served by trams that carry passengers through Prague 7. The slope where Olga accelerated her lorry is unchanged by time. Few who passed that spot now remember what occurred there on the 10th of July, 1973. The names of the 8 victims have faded from public memory, spoken now only in the quiet moments when families gather and recall those who were lost to sudden violence on a summer's day.